Everyone, and welcome to our final session of the New Systems Alliance launch week. My name is Becky Elton and I work for Changing Lives. I'm going to introduce the rest of our panelists shortly, but just to say, a little about the New Systems Alliance for maybe those of you who have not been to other sessions this week. What it is it's really a platform for people who feel that there's something wrong with systems that are encountered by people facing challenging times. Really offers the opportunity to listen, to be heard, and to take action to bring about change. And what really we're interested in is people taking control, and how we can work together with each other and the people that use our services to respond in a new way so that we make systems work for people. And this week's been, had a huge amount of content, and we've also had pianos and spoons and fluffy pens. We've had poetry and rap. We've had conversations about, how taking a person-led approach has really worked for people individually. We've heard stories of how sometimes, labels and, kind of restrictions have really hindered people's recovery. Heard about how important language is, and we've had some really great debate as well, both in the sessions and in the chat, but also we've had Twitter conversations about what this is all about. And I think what I've really welcomed is kind of the level of engagement and debate in all of this. I think it's been absolutely brilliant, because what we're not here to do is, to tell you as, for organisations or whatever, how to do things. It's not about a model that you pick off the shelf and apply. It is really about that listening and learning together and then taking that action so that we can be more person-led. I joined this movement, the New Systems Alliance, from having been involved with Mayday through the Personal Transition Service, and really understanding that although we could do loads of things as an organisation, we could do lots and lots of person-led stuff, we can really sort of challenge ourselves internally, we can talk to people externally and discuss things with our commissioners. But actually, if people were leaving our services, having had that experience, and going back out there and being neatly packaged up again into their boxes and labelled, then actually, we're not going to get the progress that we need. So, this being, that kind of open platform from which we can really build, appeals to me. Really, thinking about how people who use services are experiencing, really thinking about how frontline staff who deliver those services have that experience as well. And I think I've certainly learned two things along the way. I think, one of them, when we're talking about system change, if you just point stuff out and say, this is a bit rubbish, it doesn't work, it doesn't necessarily change it. But two, also, is that, and I do really want that Camarados badge that says this, I'm a bit shit sometimes. Sometimes it would be really easy just to go back and do the form ticking and follow whatever the specification says of the contract, and just go back to being, very us and them, and we're the rescuers and we're going to help you and we're the do-gooders and you should be grateful for that, because it's kind of easy to do it that way. And sometimes I just don't get it right. I don't listen very well sometimes, and I might upset people, or I don't see the change that actually I was perhaps intended when I was talking about whatever it was that I was talking about. So I think what the New Systems Alliance, my hopes for the New Systems Alliance is that it is a place where, we can all be kind of human to human, support each other, to learn, to really reflect on these systems, to think about, what we're doing and how we're doing it, and work it out together. And I have had the privilege of working with the people on the panel today to start off the New Systems Alliance, but we don't own it. And my real hope is that this can be owned by everybody. what I would really like to see as well in the chat, if you'd like to share that with us, what your hopes would be for the Alliance, and really kind of put it out there, and fears if that's what you'd like to share, or concerns. And if you could do that, I'm now going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves, reflect on what brought you here, if that's okay, and what your hopes are for the Alliance. I'll start with Maggie.
Okay, thanks, Becky. Just finding my mute button as ever. So good afternoon, everyone. It's really great just to join this conversation at the end of this week. It's been really great to follow the conversations I've been having during the week. And just to see what we can do to just continue to, as Becky says, create this space and keep it going over the next phase. So I think for us, reflecting on that question in terms of what brought us to this discussion, and also what brought us to this alliance. And I think for us, it's been a starting question, which is, how can we put people first when the systems that are supposed to help get in the way, or even sometimes make things worse for people? And there's absolutely no easy answers to that, but it's a question, I think, that comes up time and time again. And I also think that most people who work across the health and social care system, in housing, across community justice, in all our different roles, really want to put people first. But too often, the kind of huge effort that we put in just doesn't correspond with the experiences that people are having. And we know that because people tell us, and that many people that are already having a really difficult time just don't feel that enough has been done, with them or for them, or that the right things aren't being done. And we really do. I mean, I know we've had many conversations about how often we hear that from people. And I just find it so easy to understand why people trying to navigate the system get angry and frustrated, or really just want to shake the system off, just opt out of it altogether. And I think what that does is just also offers the simplest proof that systems aren't working in the way that we need them to. When all that commitment and energy and effort doesn't equal the results that we all want, that it just means something's bigger is at play. So I think when you're wanting to take on something bigger, it always just really benefits to just kind of be part of something bigger. And I think that's where the Alliance kind of really resonated with me. 4 organisations here, as well as I think it's over 100 kind of people that I'm counting that want to be part of this type of new conversation as well. So I think for me, the Alliance is probably just 3 quick things. It's a place where we can learn more, because there's just wider and more diverse perspectives. It's a place where we can find more solutions, because there's just fresh sets of eyes and more ideas being shared. And I think it's also just a place where we can have more influence, that a collective voice as big as this one will just be heard more clearly, providing, I think, that we can get our messages as clear as we can. And I know that's been a lot of the conversation during the week as well. I think for me as well, that opening session this week with Math and Joyce, Simon, Rebecca and Karina, it actually just provides the very best explanation of why we're here. And I think anybody that hasn't seen that really ought to just go and find an hour in your life and listen to it, because it was just a remarkable conversation between a group of remarkable people. I think what it also did for me is it opened a theme that's been a thread throughout the week, through all the sessions. And that theme is about community and about connection, about valuing normality. So those kind of basic ingredients of home, community, safety, well-being, recognition, love, that they are just the most basic ingredients that we all need to build and live our lives. And it really is just what most people are trying to secure within their own lives. So really rooting, I think, our efforts toward home and community for me is the paradigm shift. And I just no doubt that we'll continue to talk about that as the session goes on.
Thanks, Maggie. Ewan, would you like to share what's brought you here and your hopes?
Yeah, hi, I'm Ewan. I work for Platform in Wales, a mental health and social change charity. I'm here because I met Pat on Twitter. That's the honest answer. But I think I was going through a period of my time with the organisation where I was I knew something was wrong with what we were doing. I knew I had led us to a place that wasn't necessarily the right place. Not every inch of the organisation, but we were commissioned to death almost. And over the years, as the money had gone down and the expectations had increased, no shit really. Our staff were unhappy. Our staff were telling us that they didn't feel that they were delivering the stuff that people really needed, and we were feeling too kind of controlled. And I got to a point where it was kind of, is it time to go and let somebody else do this, or do we need a revolution? And I think what I was looking for at that time was a movement. And it's lovely when your eyes open and you start looking around and you don't even know it's happening necessarily, but you find people. Pat was one of the people I found. Lynn and her blog about the charity sector needing to be more punk was one of the things that I found. And math and the camarados, and just connecting with brilliant people who are critical of what is going on and identifying a need for change has been one of the most refreshing things that's happened to me. I joined the third sector, the voluntary sector, not the third sector, 30 years ago as a volunteer. And I felt like I was part of a movement. We were angry and we were young and we were pissed off that people having the toughest time were not getting anything, let alone what they needed. And then sort of by accident, I ended up with a 30-year career in this sector and ended up as a chief exec of an organisation. And I think had my eyes turned in the wrong direction by thinking growth and money and numbers of people that you're supporting is the way to go. We also spent many years influencing policy, and we've got some great policy and legislation in Wales. That does set us apart, I think, certainly from England. But there's massive areas where this just isn't being delivered on the ground. And I feel hugely privileged that I found you guys and that we found you guys, that we're able to be involved in this work in Wales. And I guess I'm here because this is our opportunity to create a space for people to come together again without competition, without agendas, just an acknowledge that something has to change. I'm really keen that we don't take the expert position. We know some stuff, we don't know other stuff. I'm really, really determined that we don't create another formula for success. This is going to be messy, it's going to be exciting and painful. It needs to be inclusive. And as you can tell, I'm quite excited. And I'm also a little bit shit sometimes, Becky. Probably more often than sometimes, actually.
Thanks, Ewan. We need a support group for people who are a bit shit sometimes. Well, that is camaraderie, isn't it? Julian.
Thanks, Becky. Great to be here. So yeah, I took a job back in 2004 running Revolving Doors Agency in the days when it was trying to prototype different ways of doing things. And I'd worked in government before then, trying to set the policy. And nothing really prepared me for how hard it is to stand in a different position in a system which is geared towards a standardized conformist approach, that you try and innovate, you try and say something different, and you have to cling on for dear life, day in, day out, trying to hold true to a set of ideas where so much of the money and accountability and measurement and power and all of those structures are pulling in a different direction. And it can be just so much easier just to give in and just say, I'll just do what is expected of me. And when I got this job, I run a charitable foundation. I wanted to create the space where people like me, but 10 years earlier, younger, could do this stuff with some degree of safety. We could de-risk it. And I think we managed some of that, but eventually the money does run out of innovation. And there's only so much money that we can provide. And the money isn't enough. Charlotte yesterday from Platform talked about the psychological safety that's needed. That if we don't have some degree of psychological safety, we can be paralyzed. And so it seems to me that the models we have of funding innovation that then hit the mainstream and change things, it's not enough. that we need amongst us to provide the mutual safety and emboldening that comes with something like a movement where you can start to see that you're part of something, that you belong to something, where all the marginal ideas and insights start coming together as a critical mass. And the critical mass can then start to weigh up against the vested interest and the inertia of the existing system and say, actually, there is a viable alternative here. And yeah, no amount of charitable money is going to be able to fund that. It has to come from providing the psychological safety. And we've got this infrastructure or architecture that's been built over decades or even centuries, which is the system that we've got. And you know, all the ways that we are structured in terms of our sectors, our legislation, the way we're trained, the way our organizations are set up, many of them are decades old. You know, it's the hard wiring, is the DNA of the system to work in a certain way. You try and stand somewhere else and say, I'd like to explore what the difference might look like. You don't have the same architecture and infrastructure to support you to do that. You're on your own. And it's very lonely, and I've seen lots of people burnt out by that experience. And so I'm hoping that this alliance can create an infrastructure that allows people to feel like they belong to something that legitimizes what they're trying to do, the difference that they're trying to bring.
Thank you, Julian. I really love that, creating that sort of safe psychological space for people. Lynn.
Hi. So yeah, I mean, so I'm Lynn. I'm from Mayday Trust, and I guess what brought me here was, you know, the years that Mayday have spent kind of really listening to people, really hearing people's experiences of systems, of services, of, you know, things that maybe haven't gone so right for people, but also from then listening to that and to the point of really doing something about that. So implementing that real kind of person-led response to the voices of what people had told us. And I think just going through all of that pain for years, you know, it's tiring, it's exhausting, it's difficult. I mean, it's also brilliant, but, you know, through that kind of experience can feel incredibly lonely, and it can feel very isolating. And I think we've certainly found that ourselves. You know, we've done this on a very small scale. We've worked with some other people, but I think, you know, what's really exciting to me to come here is to find a place, to find others, to share some of the stuff that we've done, but also to kind of really bring in those other voices. So it was great to find, you know, you guys from the kind of kickoff around, you know, really sharing the vision of what this could be. But I think the other thing that really brought me here was, you know, I've spoken to so many people over these years who have felt really frustrated, that want to do something, but they felt isolated, they felt alone, but they're doing great things, but they've got nowhere to take it. You know, and sometimes you hang up the phone or you walk away and that's gone, that connection. It's there somewhere in the back of your head, but you're on to the next meeting or whatever that is. So there's something here about the connection, about providing that space for people to come together, but in an equal way. So it's people within the system, those working in it, those associated with it, those funding it, you know, so we can come to a place, but not just talk, but a place to take positive action. So I think my hopes for the Alliance is that, you know, it doesn't fall into becoming like another group of organisations doing systems change, but, you know, really harnessed by others, by individuals, by allies, that people feel that they have a place that they can make their own. And it's probably a really disgusting analogy, but I think I got it from Gary at Plymouth, that sometimes this stuff's a bit like foot fungus. He said, you know, you've got it becomes infectious. And when you are walking the walk, wherever you tread, someone else catches it. So there's something there around how we can kind of have that infection, but in a really nice way that isn't foot fungus.
Thanks, Lynn. Right, foot fungus aside. So we've been talking quite a lot, obviously, this week about the wisdoms from the system, which was the exercise that we did a couple of months ago and have published this week. Has anyone got a particular wisdom that kind of stood out for them, and would you like to share that? Ewan?
I would say labels and deficits. And one of the best conversations I've had the pleasure of sitting in on this week was the language conversation, and just how important it is. And I know some people's eyes roll. We're talking about language again, but you know, it means everything, I think, and so many different things to different people. Just that word systems change has caused so much confusion this week, I think, and that's given me a clear message. We've got some things to do around how we describe what it is we're trying to talk about. But I'll focus specifically on our obsession with labeling other people and ourselves. And one of the things that we are looking to see as an organisation, and one of the things I hope we bring to the Alliance, is starting to think about mental distress, emotional distress, and people who might be seeing, hearing things that others don't, or feeling things that others find difficult to understand, and our obsession with psychiatric labelling and psychiatric diagnoses. We're a big supporter of the Drop the Disorder, a Disorder for Everyone movement, which is another movement we found along the way. And there's some things within that whole murky world of DSMs and psychiatric diagnoses that once you know them, you can't unknow them. And it really kind of smashes you in the face that actually there's one way of understanding this pushed at people, and there is more actually than one way of understanding this stuff for people. Sometimes a label can help somebody, but all too often it's your access into services, or your access into being vulnerable, or your access into being needy and in need of something, and then people live with that label and how they take that on and how that then impacts on the rest of their lives. I mean, we're interested in people's lives and people's experiences and how that might impact on their emotional health and well-being. But I think our obsession with labeling is in absolute direct conflict with our determination to come from a strengths-based, asset-based place of places of working. It's deficit-based, and it can be helpful, but I think overall, in the main, it isn't. So yeah, change the mental health system and move away from mental health labels.
Absolutely. I had an interesting conversation with someone the other day when, you know, I was saying, well, actually we try and label things and diagnose people when what is being manifested is an understandable response to trauma. But we put some people in a box, and then actually that then traps them in this sort of system, or traps them in the kind of, that's the only thing that will fix me. Yeah. And this person worked for mental health services, and she came back and said, no, I absolutely get that. But I also, you know, what's difficult for me is that if I don't label that person, then they don't get the access to the benefits, or, you know, to the things that might help them. And I think that shows why we need that much wider conversation about labels in the system, because it's everywhere. It's kind of insidious about how much those labels do, you know, to people.
It's like fungus, Lynn.
Like fungus, yes.
I'm so regretting
the wrong kind
of. Julian, did you want to share your wisdom?
Thank you. There's a lot of talk about fungus in the chat area. Slightly disturbing me. Yeah, the one that, I mean, there's so much in there. There's so much about them and us. And, you know, there's a quote there about focusing on strengths makes you unemployable, which is just kind of, wow. Accountability for money, not people. But the one that I guess resonates most strongly with my experience is that systems aren't accessible to all communities, and I think that was ever thus. You know, our systems are largely driven by accountabilities for outcomes. So we put the outcomes that we're seeking ahead of people, and then we define the people who need help in terms of the outcomes we're seeking, not the other way around. And we've done that forever. But then along came the austerity, and suddenly that kind of pool of the people who were being helped by services shrank even more. And I'd say I don't think it's a coincidence that, you know, this alliance is coming together basically at 10 years after the austerity started, because I think a lot of us have tried to innovate in the face of austerity, and, you know, and take up some of the opportunities as well as the challenges that the austerity created. And those innovations have now brought us together to say, we need to join this stuff up. But anyway, so yeah, systems aren't accessible to whole communities. So that pool has shrunk, but I think we're also learning in recent years that, you know, those systems aren't accessible to those who bring expertise from lived experience. They're not accessible by and large to communities of colour. You know, I'm a massive fan of the work of Back in Nottingham, and frankly, the crumbs on the edge of the table that Back In gets to do its work in Nottingham, despite the profile of the population in Nottingham, is disgraceful. I mean, it's astonishing. I have seen this in my own organisation, you know, that we've taken certain definitions of what we're looking for, funded lots of activity against it, and then looked around the room of the people that we're funding and gone, my God, we're in a room of white middle class, middle-aged people. We didn't mean to do it, but we didn't pay attention sufficiently to make sure that we didn't do that. Yeah. And so I think our frames are continually excluding. It's inevitable. It's inevitable that each of us individually doesn't pay attention to, doesn't notice, doesn't give credit to experiences that do not directly resonate with us, and we consciously or unconsciously screen them out. And then we try and include them back in, but it's too late because, you know, we've got the frame wrong. People aren't speaking our language. They're not coming up with the right kind of organizational structures. They're not giving us the kind of outcomes that we're looking for. They don't fit our idea of what change looks like. And suddenly we're viewed as an exclusive clique that people steer clear of and say, well, the power sits over there and they're just serving themselves. And so it goes on. And my organization has absolutely been part of that. And so this wisdom here for me is about recognizing that if you don't begin with as many perspectives as you possibly can on a thing, you're inevitably going to act in an exclusive, discriminatory way, which is why a lot of us at the moment are having to confront the racism in our own organizations and many other biases as well.
So how do we as a panel, you're maybe just going to come in and answer this question, Lynn, then, you know, as a panel of white people. And
to answer the question, actually, I think what I was going to come in and kind of have a bit of reflection looking back on this week, actually. And I think even as the week of events that we've had, I'm not sure that we've achieved that. I think, you know, the panel have been kind of majority white, and, you know, a few people have actually come forward and said that to me and brought that up. So I think it's just a point of a reflection, especially now, as we're going to take this forward, that we make sure that we don't perpetuate what people felt in that wisdom with the Alliance.
And how do we do that as an alliance? How do we make it a space where people, you know, all people from all perspectives, backgrounds, you know, experiences can engage?
Well, I'll jump in as the person who raised it. I'd say that there has to. You can't retrofit. I mean, I think this is the whole point of this alliance: is you can't retrofit aspirations onto something that was never designed for them in the first place. It's a recipe for failure. So you have to create a space at the start for deep listening and connection and trust building. So I think that this alliance is going to have to resource and build in the time for trust and relationships and connections to grow, and for that to, if you like, snowball from quite careful, deep listening. And you know, it's got some good foundations with the Wisdom series that, you know, that's that's where this stuff has come from. It's come from listening and being with people and really trying to create that kind of platform. So I think it needs to carry on in that spirit, and it needs to be connecting more and more to itself, not just kind of going, right, we've got the alliance now, what's our manifesto, let's all go. It's got to carry on in that spirit.
Yeah, I mean, to echo that and to say, well, a little bit of our own advice, which is get out the way and allow other people's voices to be heard and to have power within the alliance. And we will be judged on what we do, not what we say, or judged more on what we do. We have to be really active and really purposeful, and, you know, go talk to people, go connect with communities, use our infrastructures and networks and people that we know, and actively make the space. And, you know, the proof is in the pudding by this panel not being the same panel next year, really, and that being meaningful.
Absolutely. Maggie?
I mean, yeah, just to support the statements that have been made already, and as a kind of white middle-aged person, I too have limited knowledge on what to offer as a solution to ensuring that we do have really diverse leaders, you know, representing that, you know, we understand that people are affected and impacted disproportionately as a result of existing inequalities, even before they set one foot into the systems, you know, that we're here talking about. So the idea of collective leadership, but collective diverse leadership, that we can bring together people with personal experiences and professional experiences and others, and just learn from that experience. So as Ewan says, you know, this time this year, this panel could look differently.
Lynn, do you want to share your wisdom, reflections on the wisdoms?
Yeah, well, that was definitely one of my wisdoms that would really stood out to me. And I think we addressed that one. And I think the other one to me was the one about trust, about trusting people to know what they need. And why don't we just listen? And I think that one really stood out to me, because I think, you know, in our experience, we've really tried to do that. We've really tried not to come in with fixes, with interventions, with new innovations. We really have tried to start with just listening and using that as a kind of basis as to, you know, informing our strategy, informing, you know, everything that we take forward, and taking a really different approach around kind of how we prototype and learn in retrospect, rather than think that we know the answer and then try and prove ourselves right. And again, I think this is something that really sings out for me, not just with, you know, the work that we do, but also with the alliance that we're hoping to kind of offer out here, that we do start with listening, and not coming up with any solutions, that it becomes a place that people can have a voice and that can be heard. And I think, you know, just trusting and holding the space, holding the time, waiting to see what kind of comes, what happens as well, being purposeful in that. But that one really struck me around, you know, the importance of listening and not assuming. And holding the silence.
So I was trying to hold the silence there, Lynn.
I can't do it, Becky.
No. No, I think that listening, and yeah, allowing the space, isn't it, for people to say, and, you know, to say what they're thinking and be heard and explore that, I think is really important.
And there's stuff in the chat which I agree with, about, you know, the balance between you know, getting it right, not beating ourselves up, between being and doing, between learning and action and all these things. And I think that's right. And, you know, there's always limited patience for talking shops and for groups of people coming together around ill-defined objectives and so on. But I guess what I would say is that there's the thing that feels really important to me about this is that there's lots of things going on. There's no lack of people trying to make change happen, but there isn't anywhere for those people to come together, to learn from each other, to strengthen each other's resolve, start feeling like they're part of something that's shifting things, and for that then to become visible. And for me, a big part of this is the visibility of this work, of making the good work that's going on known in, you know, wherever it needs to be known, and for it to evolve as well, because we're only, each of us, a small part of the change that's needed, and none of us has got this right. So there's also something about allowing a space where we can hold each other's strengths and imperfections and say this is okay. And we may not agree with each other. We may not, you know, fully sign up to each other's practice. And, you know, your approach to lived experience wouldn't be mine, but I see your intention. I see where you're trying to go to. I think we are trying to deal with the same barriers here. And there is enough in common with what we're doing for this to start feeling like a movement for change. And I think that's going to be one of the challenges. Is there is nothing with the existing system that challenges why are all you people hanging together as a system. It's just assumed that that's how things are, business as usual. It's the way the world was made. So when a new group of people try and hang together in an equivalent way, there's such a risk of us defining ourselves in terms of our differences. Whereas I think those differences are important and need to be debated, and fresh insight can come from that. If we can do it from a position of mutual respect and a knowledge that we're all trying to get into the same kind of place, but with different strategies, and I think that could be very powerful.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think that's one of the things that we do need to really guard against, is that it becomes a kind of closed, a bit of an echo chamber, really, of people reflect, you know, it's that whole thing, you know, you talk to the people that agree with you, don't you? And I think we've got to really push ourselves to have that debate, and make sure that, you know, we're not going down that line of just, yeah, narrowing our focus and perspective. Maggie, would you like to reflect on your favourite wisdoms, if that's favourite's the right word?
Thanks, Becky. And I think, yeah, do you know, I mean, I think like everybody here, there are 10 really important wisdoms based on an exercise that listened to over 130 people. One of those sessions was in Scotland. I mean, just really important discussions and a real sense in terms of what we're saying here today as well, that there is no other place for people that know that there's something, but they don't know where else to have that conversation. So at the very least, kind of creating that space to challenge thinking, each other's thinking, and, you know, to start having those kind of conversations as we go forward. I think in terms of the wisdoms, I mean, personally, one of the things that definitely motivates me most is unfairness. I think that's probably true of all of us. So the inequalities across each of our lives, and how that actually affects us all. So wisdom 4, which was that kind of focus on the individual problems and distracting from structural failure, I think is one that really resonated and spoke to me most. And I think also was one of the kind of key themes I took away from the session that we had in Scotland in July. And I think when I reflect on that, and if we even look at some of the basics of the places that we all live, and I've sampled quite a few, and I'm sure everyone here is the same. And what you can't fail to kind of pick up along the way is the massive inequalities, the stark differences on the kind of absolute basics of how we live. Things like noise levels, the amount of space we have, our feelings of safety, and even the quality of the air in some places. And these are absolute basics. And that's before then, of course, you move into things like you know, the inequalities in how we access money and material advantages that go with that. And I think I start with that because for me, when we talk about systems change, there are just so many different layers to that. And the bigger structural kind of socio-economic systems that affect people and places differently. So I think we all understand that poverty and inequality is the biggest driver for all the issues that, and all the labels that we've been talking about this week. The biggest driver of poor health, of low well-being, trauma, abuse, violence, addictions, homelessness. I mean, there are these big structural systems that drive all that. And of course, the distribution of the risk of experiencing those things is also unfair. And that all interacts, of course, doesn't it, with the housing and the labour markets and, of course, the welfare system itself. So I think for me, thinking about those bigger systems being the things that drives people into the systems that we're talking about today, the support systems, those systems of services. And I guess within all that, there is just no amount of great policy or legislation that compensates for that chaos on the ground that Joyce described it at the session earlier this week. And, you know, just the difficulties, I think, for people living and working in the system that are created by that.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I've really reflected on is how we start talking about prevention, is I suppose that's the right word, but absolutely, you know, how what we're talking about now is trying to shift the system for people who are going through those tough times. But actually, how do we do that, like upstream stuff around poverty and inequality that actually stops those tough times becoming, you know, that sort of cycle of engagement with services and not being able to kind of pop out of those and you know, get into that real sort of, you know, fulfilling life, whatever that means to the individual, you know, because I think it's absolutely, you know, we have to do stuff at this end because that's where we're all working, but actually, you know, the ideal is to get to this end, to get upstream and really try and work on some of that structural stuff.
And that's really hard. I mean, I don't know what it's like everywhere else, but you know, we've got prevention written into legislation. We have a Future Generations Act and Commissioner in Wales, but it's still not really happening on the ground. And one of the things we're struggling with, and I would imagine we start to learn from each other as an alliance, is how do we connect politicians with this? Because politicians quite like pretty simple, easy to understand policy aspects, rather than the whole system's wrong. I mean, you need to change it all. So, you know, we've got Welsh elections coming up next year, and, you know, starting to think about, you know, actually some of this single issue campaigning, it's a bit like air under plastic, isn't it? You pop it down over there and it just pops up somewhere else because the system is wrong. So waiting times, for example. So yeah, how we connect to politicians across the devolved nations in terms of big system change, which is what you were talking about, Margaret. The system's failed by the time people hit our systems, because the big system that's meant to look after us all has failed.
I think that's really...
Sorry, carry on.
No, I was going to say, I think it's really interesting as to how we do that influence. You know, we've kind of purposely not done that for a long time, because I think, you know, we were really focusing on a kind of working with people. Then it was kind of, we were working with other organisations. Then, you know, the next bit of the system kind of work with local authorities. And I think the way that we've always tried to do that is through, we would call it the influencing through doing. So it's the, you know, we do the work, we model the change, and then it's who's attracted to it. I think we've never gone out and tried to convince ever. You know? And we've always had people come to this because it's really resonated with them. And I think we were probably at the beginning spent a bit of time trying to kind of, not sure it's the best analogy, but, you know, pushing rocks up hills with trying to convince people. And it's absolutely emotionally draining and it takes all your energy. But where we've come from is, you know, people have been attracted to this, they've come to this. There are, you know, we call it bagging the enthusiasts almost. And that's almost how we've started to kind of build a lot of this change so far. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about, and I didn't mean to steer it to, you know, back to where we were before, but the notion of echo chamber. And actually, I was really excited because, you know, looking at who was coming along to a lot of these sessions, there are quite a lot of new voices. people we've never come across before, but the echo chamber was in one place, you know. and I almost feel really excited that this is the first time that all of the different people that I've spoken to have been together. And I think there's a real power in that, around starting with your enthusiasts and modeling that change and seeing who's attracted to it as a way to kind of influence and grow.
Does that lead us on to a little bit of some of the challenge, I think, that we've had this week as well, around the kind of I think it was called unfathomable, I can't say the word, unfathomable language, basically, that we're talking about stuff in a way that is just too complex, and people can't, unless we've all, you know, you've had hours of discussion about paradigm shift, then, you know, it's hard to engage in. What are people's thoughts on that?
I think yes. I think you're right. I mean, a lot of the language that we use, and it's something that we struggle with an awful lot to try and get right. And I think, you know, we are talking to so many different people with this stuff, you know, we're trying not to be any exclusive in any way, but I think we do sometimes fall into that trap of, yes, we've had the conversations, we know what we're talking about, how do we make that accessible? And I hope it's just some of the sessions this week have tried to kind of unpick language, have tried to unpick paradigm shift, to really kind of get into the skin of what we mean by those things. But I think it's a work in progress. And I think feedback like that is really important and really valuable for us to hear, because what we don't want to do is go back to what we were saying before, is excluding people even just by the language that it uses.
I think I agree with that. And one of the lessons of this week is almost certainly that you can't underestimate the power of language. Our words create our worlds, and they prime our brains to think in a certain kind of way based on the words we're using. We're triggered to think and act in certain ways by words and language that that shape our neural pathways. It's kind of how we're made as human beings, and so this stuff is really, really powerful. And so we have to be really conscious of it. And so I would say that every sector has unfathomable language. I remember when I joined Revolving Doors thinking, what the hell is a presenting need? It's like, you know, whereas now it wouldn't occur to me that that wasn't a, you know, everyday language. So everyone's got it. There is a group of people who think of themselves as system changey people who've studied this stuff really hard and come up with concepts and have come up with ideas like paradigm shift. And yes, they have value, but we probably need to limit those words to 3 or 4 words that are useful to this kind of work, and then ditch the rest of them. You know, there are, when you're trying to move into a new space and doing things differently, it's almost inevitable that the words will change to describe the new kind of experience. But let's not have a kind of word salad where everybody's thinking, I don't know what this is. We just need 2 or 3 words that help us describe this new world. But I think even more importantly, we need a way by which we can talk to each other where we can question each other's language and say, I'm sorry, when you say holistic or integrated or wraparound or personalized, what does that actually mean? And what kind of implications does that have for how you see the world? Because, you know, we're spraying this language all over the place without thinking about what it means for our understanding of each other's humanity. So in as accessible and as equal a way as we can, we need to be more conscious about the words that we're using.
I think that's a great point at which we're going to have a short break and come back to another couple of discussion points and answer some of the questions or reflect some of the stuff that's been going on in the chat as well. So I think we have 4 minutes, don't we? Because that means we play the song twice. That's what I've learned this week. So right, we will see you back here at 2 to 3, if that's okay with everybody. It always feels a bit funny coming back to these things because you kind of expect to see the audience, don't you? And we're all just back here looking at each other on our screens. So one of the things which has been levelled at us during the week is that actually we are not following our own philosophy, and actually we're being very deficit based about the existing system and not talking about the strengths of that system, and maybe, you know, not acknowledging some of the good work. That was some of the things that's come up in the chat and has been posed as a question. What are your thoughts on that, Maggie?
I think it's absolutely kind of a fair comment, and also I think where a lot of our own conversations have arrived at, and I think particularly some of the conversations that were had earlier in the week, those threads of connection and community, and when we talk about trying to root our efforts in something that really is much more about community, connection, normality, I mean, what we need to combine with that, I think, is what we all know about great community development. And great community development, of course, works from the principle of building from what's strong and not what's wrong. And that's actually an approach that feels comfortable for me as a person. It feels like an approach that my organisation would adopt. And I think it's just definitely something that the Alliance, as it continues to develop, not just the 4 organisations here, but everybody else that's part of it, about finding what's strong and continuing to build from that and to celebrate success and to find those great stories of when it is working. And that's not about taking away that space where people can come and express their frustration, because that's going to be incredibly important to keep, because we know people want that. People living and working in the system want to have that safe space, you know, to chat through those frustrations, but to use that as our learning and then to build from that.
Yeah, I can see how that is a perception that arises from the work, and it can be hard and dispiriting to see good work not acknowledged. I think that the New System Alliance is not trying to say that there isn't good work happening. I think what the New System Alliance is trying to say is that that good work often happens despite rather than because of systems. And that we need to work out what is the good work and work out what the enabling conditions for that work is. And, you know, because I've seen through the work that we funded too many people who have felt themselves pushed to the margins of organizations and the systems because they're trying to do something that they believe to be necessary, but they haven't got the space, the authority, the agency or whatever to get on and do it. And they get burnt out, or they end up leaving their jobs or leaving their organizations, get labeled as mavericks. Or they end up having to go off and set up a new organization to compensate for another organization. And so it goes on. And we need to attend to all of that good work and really understand what it's trying to tell us about how the overarching stuff enables all of this to happen. We spend too much time with one bit of the system trying to correct or compensate for another bit of the system. And it's a waste of people's energies and money, and ultimately doesn't serve people. And so, yeah, you know, you get foundations like mine who are approached daily with people with good ideas and innovations, looking for scraps of money when hundreds of millions of pounds are spent on the existing systems that their grant request of £30,000 or £50,000 is trying to correct. And it's not fair, and it's not effective, that we have in a little box over here that stuff. We need to be engaging with the majority of people who want their work to be aligned with a set of principles and a set of values that they believe in.
Yeah, and I think I said in our session earlier, there was a quote that came out to me before that was really impactful for me about, you know, we're not just saying everything's wrong for the sake of saying it's wrong, but it's about making it all of our social responsibility to question everything. And I think being able to kind of look at things and question things. And the other thing that really came up to me this week was a lot of this work has to start with reflections on us and ourselves, and that can be incredibly difficult. You know, ourselves as individuals and what we bring and our part that we play within systems, within services, and the recognition sometimes that, you know, sometimes we are part of the problem ourselves, and that's a really hard thing to reflect upon and to own that. And absolutely, you know, it's not just about shouting about it and saying we don't think it's right, you know, and I think that's why we always start with the wisdoms, with listening. And that really came out from the wisdom from the system. It was an open invitation for people to come and share their experiences. And what came out of that was kind of raw honesty and pain that people have felt within being quite trapped with some of these systems that we have. So I think there is space to kind of really, you know, to start modeling an alternative, to doing something different. You know, sometimes we need to be the example of change rather than just trying to change what we have to try and make it feel more tolerable, but actually to do the difference and to see where that takes us, because I think that really honours what people have told us in the wisdoms and through our listening.
Can I say a bit more? I chaired a session yesterday, so I've got lots of pent up things to say that I wasn't allowed to say while chairing. It's just that when I'm talking about the conditions of what allows good work to happen, I think we have been stuck in a model, and Christian Seelos talked about this yesterday, of success and outcomes and solutions. You know, all of our funding methods are built around, have you got the solution to this problem? Well, no, of course I haven't got the solution to this problem. It's structural, it's generational, it requires the contribution of all sorts of different people. It actually requires this person to feel like they have agency, ownership of their own life, have a safe home, etc., etc. Of course, my little organization isn't the solution to that, but I might be a part of the solution. But what's going to enable lots of different actors to simultaneously be part of the solution? And that comes down to things like power. Who holds the ownership and the agency? Who should be listened to? And whose opinion counts here? All of those sorts of things, and the culture of what governs this whole system isn't down to, you know, good work coming out of individual organizations. It comes down to, who do we value? Whose lives do we think are important? And to use Ewan's phrase, to what extent are we prepared to get out of the way to enable people to step forward and own their own paths through life, and so on. So I think that we can get stuck in mindsets that have been shaped for us, that says that, you know, if I don't like how the whole thing is working, individuals within that start to feel defensive and criticize and say, well, I do good work. Well, you may well do good work. We're all trying our best, but we're existing in a 19th century paradigm with notions of, you know, that are still with us, with notions of deserving and undeserving poor and all of that crap that has come through to us that we don't even know that we've internalized. But that sits above us and between us, not in our organizational models of good practice. It shows, you know, that the system is perfectly is perfectly designed to get the results that it gets. So if we're getting poor outcomes, it's because there is an effect that is occurring between us all. None of our individual intentions that is occurring between us all that reflects our culture as a society and the value that we place on each other. And I think that's the thing that we need to be focusing on in this alliance.
Absolutely, and it's that I guess part of how we create that safe space for people to explore that is for it to be okay that there is some discomfort in that, saying, you know, yes, absolutely, good intentions, we're all trying our hardest and trying our best, but actually some things need to shift and we need to work that out together, not just say, well, you're doing it wrong and we're doing it right or whatever, you know.
It's messy, and I think we just have to live with the fact it's messy. And also, we're not here to make everybody like us or agree with us. We want to be connected and for as many people to be involved in this conversation and this movement for change as we can. But, you know, it's good to feel discomfort. I felt uncomfortable with some of the things I've had to fess up to in the way we're running the organisation and how we've needed to change. It's speaking a little bit to a question I noticed around, this is a phrase that Charlotte Platform uses a lot, but how do you change the wheels while the car is going at 100 miles an hour? So how do you do the change? And how is that making people feel in our organisation? So it's back to the psychological safety point. You know, we made a mistake back in the day before we became Platform. You know, it's quite easy for things to feel like the new favourite thing that we're doing. So for the old stuff to feel devalued, and so therefore the people doing it are devalued, and so therefore they feel shit and disengaged in the organisation and the work. So the challenge we have is around how we bring the people in our organisations with us, as well as the people out there who we want to join the alliance. So I won't talk about it in detail, and again, I can't claim the credit for bringing this into our organisation, but Margaret Wheatley's two-loop learning model that talks about stewards and innovation and hospice, and just models in organisations and alliances are really, really helpful sometimes for individuals to help make sense of how they're feeling, and so anchor into what's that feeling I'm feeling, why am I feeling defensive, why do I feel under threat by this, what can we do about that? Because ultimately we're all individuals and we can make our own decisions as adults about whether we engage in this stuff, whether we like it or whether we don't. But sometimes those kind of psychological models are really helpful to help people understand why they're feeling the things they're feeling.
Do you know, I think that just it really draws together a theme that came from the conversation yesterday, Julian, that you facilitated, which was kind of almost discussing the merits of paradigm shift versus incrementalism. So the idea that, you know, do we want a big revolution? Do we want a big revolutionary change? Or actually what we're trying to achieve is incremental improvement towards something that's better. And I think, you know, that kind of two-loop model that was described kind of almost operates in that same place, doesn't it? It recognises that, you know, safe transition is important because we're talking about a system that has people in it, you know, so we can't throw everything out until we have something in its place.
I think that starts to answer a bit of the next question that's come up from the chat, which is about, you know, if you're trying to, do you develop the work within the system versus detaching entirely from the system? I don't think anyone could ever detach entirely from the system because the system isn't a thing. It's, you know, what we perceive it and all the rest of it. But I suppose that it's that idea that actually, can you, if you're part of the system, how much can you change it?
I think I'll say it feels brutal doing it from within it. And that's, you know, that's really been a lot of our learning over these years. And, you know, before we even knew what systems change was, it really trying to model this kind of, you know, a different response. And we did this in a new area, and we were battered, absolutely battered by, you know, other providers feeling threatened by it, not trusting it, thinking it was fluffy, thinking it was risky. It was personal to a lot of the, you know, the coaches that we had doing the work. They all left. You know, there were people moved on buses. I'm not sitting next to that fucking Mayday lot. You know, it was really hard. And I think actually this was in our kind of proof of concept phase, and we came to Lankelly because I think you guys are funding this, and we said it's mess, we've ruined it, it's not right, it's not working. And that's when you said, you're not failing, this is systems change. And it was that kind of, you know, we're like that, what now? You know, it felt very academic, you know, this whole world of systems change, but it was kind of a real kind of quite brutal introduction to trying to model the change within a current system that did feel very deficit based. And the response from that was a very human response, and it was very personal. It was very, very difficult. So I think, you know, when we talk about modeling change within the existing system, I'd like to put the caveat that that's not an easy thing to do. And I think also there is space for both. I think also being able to model an alternative maybe outside of a system, and then seeing who's drawn to that by modeling the change and seeing what that looks like, and seeing who's attracted. And that can be a way of kind of building momentum and tipping point, if you like, around, you know, taking it out, doing something different, keeping it over here, and seeing what comes of that. So I think it's not an either or thing.
Yeah, I mean, we talked yesterday about the fact that, and I mentioned the breakthroughs that happened in the 80s with LGBT rights. That didn't just come from Peter Tatchell trying to arrest the Archbishop of Canterbury. Didn't just come from Ian McKellen and Stonewall going into Number 10 to talk about John Major. It came from you know, them and multiple other actors pursuing radically different strategies, both in and outside of systems. I mean, Peter Tatchell, you're right, Becky, that we can never completely escape the systems that, you know, that surround us, the paradigms that we're part of. But, you know, Peter Tatchell's had a damn good try. So we all have different roles to play, and we may not even like each other as we're playing those roles. We may wish that each other wasn't playing those roles. I don't know how much respect there was between Stonewall and Outrage in those days. I was a bit young at the time, but looking back on it, they were both necessary. And so we, you know, and you fast forward to our current context, and there's a hell of a lot of organizations that are asking themselves quite hard questions now about their anti-racist practice, based on a set of events and pressures that came from outside their organization. In some cases that have helped people within those organizations speak up for the first time. And these aren't comfortable things, and you start to see the degree to which you might be part of the problem that you're trying to solve. And that maybe some of these systems live within me, and maybe I am internalizing and deploying oppressive practices in my work without intending to do that. So, you know, there is no destination where we're cured of oppressive systems. We can't, you know, there isn't something that we can take to get them out of ourselves. It is a continual and ongoing practice. And so, you know, I don't, these distinctions between in and out can be quite revealing about the degree to which each of us is prepared to say, I am part of the system that needs to change. And then there's a thing about, you know, well, where can I go for the practices and the structures and the safe space that allows me to think this stuff through and deal with this stuff within my own practice? And each of us will make different, come to different conclusions about how much we need to change and how much risk we need to take, and whether we need to get out of the way completely and make space for somebody else. You know, we'll each reach our own conclusions, but nonetheless, it is indispensable that we need space for us to challenge ourselves, to educate ourselves, and to see ourselves potentially through other people's eyes and think, oh shit, I did not know that I was causing so much harm when I meant to do good. The only other thing I would say is that back to kind of insiders and outsiders, you know, that it is also the case that 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 vested interest is sitting within large, well-funded organizations that crowd out voices that need to be heard. There's no doubt about that. I was having a conversation with someone yesterday who was talking about how much white-led organizations have crowded in to take the money to undertake research on racial justice issues, and the degree to which that her organization, which is a Black-led organization, has been positioned as a small subcontractor to be consulted with no assumption at all that they might be leading this work, and how rife that is. And so, you know, there is something about us challenging ourselves, but I agree with you, and we're, you know, this isn't about making friends. Some of this stuff needs to be called out, because absolutely there are careers to be made stopping other people from being heard.
Thanks, Julian. I think we're kind of coming towards the end of the session, and I will come back to everybody for some final thoughts. And you know, we've talked a lot this week. We've had a lot of you know, conversations around the kind of, you know, what's happening in the system, what we're doing, what might be a better way of going about things. And although, you know, obviously, you know, we're not here to say this is how you do it, there are some things that we've kind of tested out and learned through the New Systems Alliance already, that, you know, there's that offer to people too. So I don't know, Lynn, do you just want to tell us a little bit about the New System Lab, what's on there, and what the intention is behind that?
Yeah, thanks, Becky. And so the New System Lab, and I think, you know, we didn't want to come to this with nothing to offer. And I think, you know, we've like I've said a couple of times, you know, we've spent a good kind of 9-10 years trying to kind of prototype different ways of doing things, and we've kind of created ways that people can get involved if they want to do something. So the New System Lab is there really if people are looking to kind of really activate what they're doing, if they want to do something. This is kind of what we've got at the moment. And it's mostly based around the stuff that we've learned through the kind of person-led transition and strength-based response work that we've done. So I'm going to have a caveat. This isn't a toolkit. Never, ever should be a toolkit. It's not an approach. It's not a new innovation. And I think what we've tried to put out there is more of a methodology for systems change, about how when we pass power and agency back to people, when we listen, and we can use that as a way to kind of change our thinking, to change ourselves, to start to change the culture of our organizations, and then to kind of collectively challenge with that. So the New System Lab is, it's on the website, and it's, you know, there's a few things in there. We've got the innovation partnership stuff for anybody that was on the conversation that we had earlier today, around those that want to really kind of pick something up and go with that as a kind of organizational thing. There's stuff in there around personal development, and I hate to call it training because a lot of it is unlearning. So we have sessions that we run called System Reflex. There's a PTS qualification for practitioners. It's a hell of a painful thing to do. There's a lot of unlearning in there to really unpick practice, what you thought of as good practice, what does it look like to really work in a different way and reflect on those systems. There's stuff in there around kind of where we're quite open with sharing a completely new way of capturing impact. So we've been working on that now. We've got quite a good evidence base, if you want to call it that, around capturing assets and strengths rather than measuring in some of the deficit ways that we used to. And more importantly, I guess, the wisdoms methodology is part of that. And when we talk about the deep listening, it's kind of how do you go about doing that in a way that kind of really captures people's voices without labeling them further or alienating them, or bringing people forward as spokespeople, and doing that in quite a different way. And I think I would say if you're going to go there, it would be really worth looking at the wisdoms and seeing if that's a place to start for people, to really start to look at how we set our strategies, how we look at changing our work. And I would always go back to the first thing to do is listen. And so that's a really good way. It was our way. You know, there are many other ways. It's the one that we've kind of found has really worked for us. And I think as we go, you know, we're going to be looking at other resources. We're starting with what we've got. you know, we're kind of pushing the first domino with it. So have a browse if you like, but I think, you know, what we're really interested in is hearing what other people are doing as well.
Thanks, Lynn. So hopefully that's given everybody food for thought about next steps. I'd just like to come to everybody now and just get any kind of final thoughts or reflections on the whole week, on this session, and how we might look going forward. Maggie, can I come to you first?
Just a fantastic week. There's been some remarkable conversations. There's been a lot of people that want to have this conversation. And as I said at the start, we came into this and wanted to be involved with it because we also know there's a lot of people that want to have this conversation, that there's something just not working all times for everyone. And until there is, then there's a space to continue to talk about that. And that's really what this is looking to achieve. So to continue to hold that space, to challenge my thinking and each other's thinking. I'm taking away the need for simple and precise language. It's really hard. And a lot of the time we use that as a shortcut and a shorthand, don't we? But to be understood and to make sure that we all mean the same thing when we use the same words, I think it's going to be important that we do that. Space for tension, I think it's really important as well. That's what's going to move us forward. So, you know, people that have you know, concerns or challenges with the language or even with the philosophy or any other part of it, that continuing to create space for that tension is going to help us all and help us move forward. I'm really interested in continuing those conversations round about incrementalism versus paradigm shift, which just goes right back into that unfathomable language. But nonetheless, it's such important principles that are involved in that. And I really hope that we can continue to move forward in that, all of us, the 100+ people that are involved. And I think, as we said from the beginning, building from what's strong as much as we can, because it is a lot of inspiration to draw from.
Thank you. Ewan, what would your final thoughts be? For the session, obviously.
I think halfway through the week I was thinking we need to pin things down so people understand it better. But now I'm kind of thinking, no, we don't. Because if we pin it down, we become exclusive, I think, too quickly. So I think we kind of need to live with the uncertainty. And so one of the things I think we need to learn to do is how do we sit with the uncertainty and allow others to sit with the uncertainty, to allow the creativity and the conversation to happen. Creativity gets locked down if we start to define things too quickly. So I've changed my mind on that. I think we need a little bit more chaos, feeling the anxiety that creates in us and others, and holding that space, which you've talked a lot about this week, Lynn. I'm really looking forward to just making these conversations start to happen. So the 100+ people who have joined us this week, connecting with those. One of the things we have learned through this awful time with this virus is that you can do this easily and you can do it quickly and you can get to people and make conversations happen without trekking halfway across Wales, for example. So I'm really looking forward to us walking the talk and giving the space for people's voices, thoughts, excitement, concerns, whatever, to be heard, and seeing how that shapes us. And Math Potts sent us a threatening message via Twitter earlier in the week, which in the words of RuPaul were, "Don't fuck it up." And I promise you, Math, we're going to do our best not to fuck it up.
Thanks, Ewan. Julian, what would your final thoughts be?
So I think what this week has helped me think about is that the degree to which this alliance is modelling the change that it's professing or prescribing, that we need to that unjust processes do not lead to just outcomes, that the justice of this work needs to be embodied in the work of this alliance, which means that we need to do a lot more to think about who is owning this alliance, on whose terms, with whose evidence, you know, with whose understanding of what a good future looks like. and there's been masses in the chat that has really sharply honed in on that. And that isn't just you know, a kind of motherhood and apple pie, you know, thing, that actually changes like system changes like Russian dolls, you know, that you've got to model the next stage and the next stage and the next stage, that each bit of the stage mirrors the next. And we've come from a world where we think that change can happen through command and control, you know, through entirely diametrically opposite behaviors will somehow magically produce change on the ground, that command and control can produce co-production somehow. It's absolute nonsense. We have to be rigorous with ourselves about modeling the change, and that also means rigorous about who we consider to be ourselves. I think this what this week has taught me is that there needs to be both challenge in this process, the kind of calling out that I described earlier, calling ourselves out and helping each other to identify where harmful systems sit within each of us. I think that is necessary work, unavoidable, but that also needs to be payoff. We also need the attractors, as Pat McArdle has described them. We need the attractors in this work as well. The stuff that inspires us, makes us think that things are possible, starts to embody what this difference looks like. And there are loads of examples of this that I've been privileged to see in my work, and several of the people are on there in the chat room now who've done quite extraordinary stuff against all odds to model what change looks like. So yeah, I think someone yesterday talked about coherence, and I think that's right, that that too often we look for alignment, that we've all got to agree on everything. And that's not going to happen. And we're all very different from each other and got different approaches because we come from very different backgrounds and so forth. But this is an opportunity to get some coherence around what we're trying to do, that we're each trying to play a different part in this change, and that we can see that in each other and respect and value it, even if we don't fully agree with it.
Thank you. Lynn, last but not least.
Oh, you can go next, Becky, too.
Well,
I think, yeah, just, I mean, my reflections on the week, if I'm honest, I'm feeling incredibly overwhelmed. For the content of the sessions, from what we've heard from the chats, from the people that have been in touch, and I think I'm really looking forward to taking some time to really listen and reflect on that. I had a really interesting quote that I saw yesterday, and someone said, it's great to rant, moan and connect, but there's a power created from that. Let's use that power to make some really positive change. And I love that. And I think, you know, that it's right, you know, we've got this space. We've suddenly got this space to kind of talk, to bring ourselves, to share our humanity, to bring all of this stuff here. But we have to recognize the power that creates and what we do with that. So I think for me, you know, I'm trying not to take any immediate action with any of this at all. Purposefully sitting in a space of, you know, I'm not going to ping out an email today, not going to do anything like that. I think, you know, there is a period of reflection probably for everyone that's been involved in this. And also there's so much energy that's come. And I think, you know, you kind of think in your head, there's a risk we'll lose the energy. People have had this energy for 10 years, you know, forever how long. I don't think it's going to disappear if, you know, if we just wait a little bit. And I think I would say, you know, take your energy somewhere. Don't just sit with it, because it's powerful. And, you know, and I think we all, like I said, we have a duty to kind of, to do that, to share that, to reflect on that. And I think, you know, somebody said, what if we're not on social media? I saw that in the chat, you know, and I'd say just, you know, go on the website, sign up as an ally. We're going to bring everyone into a space, but we need to make that space right. So we need to reflect on that first. So if you're waiting for the what next, I'd probably put the challenge out as well and say, what do you want?
That's a really, really great way to sum up and finish, because I do realise it's now 3:30 and my timekeeping is not worked very well. But I think, you know, for me, that's absolutely it. It's about that power of kind of conversation that then leads to action, but making sure that we've got that real space for thinking and reflecting and learning from each other. And, you know, that for me is the real power in this alliance. So I just want to say thank you so much to everybody on the panel today. Thank you to everybody who's been on the panel this week, everyone who's come along and engaged and chatted. Obviously, you know, we have to do a massive thanks to Mayday's tech support team, because it's gone incredibly smoothly. They've done a brilliant job. And, you know, not just this week, but organising it all. And, you know, Steph in particular, I think, you know, you've done an absolutely cracking job of getting us this amazing week of conversation that I think will just give us a really good foundation for, you know, the New System Alliance and how we move forward with this and really build on that. So thank you all very much. Have a great weekend, everybody. And we hope to see you all very soon.